Mrs. Drumheller.
Yes, Mayor. I usually go into senior news. The seniors did have their bingo this past Saturday, so there's nothing to announce there, and I think I'll just save that committee things and other things for Tuesday, because I wanted to write my thoughts down as well. You know, at the Wednesday's executive session covering personnel issues, only 4 of the elected council members attended. Where were the other 3? You know, the least that the 3 people could have done is to show up to find out why I was horrified. Because we were all present, and I'm pretty sure we wouldn't be at quite the same level of hostility if we were. By the way, I'm gonna say some things. I've known some moments of hostility on council. I know what it feels like to be at the bottom of a dung heap, and much the same way some people are trying to do with Mrs. Allison. My way of describing what happens to councilwomen up here, and I will say councilwomen, is what I call verbal rape. Picture this. There you are, being pummeled over and over in public, casting shame upon you while you're getting it. All the while, disinformation, vile, targeted behavior, and outright lies. In my case, I've been on council beginning with the year 2009. In my case, 4 grown men, 1 who had been sitting to the left of me, not you, Dr. Bresock.
Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you. And 3 to the right, taking their turns, piling on. And then after all of that, I was told how awful I was after that. And I must tell you, that sets, especially within the first 6 or 8 months, that sure sets you for what you either are going to survive, develop very thick skin over, or, shrivel away. But that last Wednesday was an opportunity for all of us to gain knowledge that I am sure some up here did not want to be any part of. Better to remain ignorant and shoot the messenger. For sure, Mr. Erosenko didn't want to hear it. So all were not present for this executive session debate. And that is what people are calling the closed-door session. We had a special meeting that was called for everyone to show. There was going to be an executive session. That is where disclosure of the information would have come out. So all were present for it. Last time we had an executive session, I think it was the mayor, Mr. Johns, and Mr. Duncan didn't like what they heard during that executive session, and they got up and left. So maybe they figured they would avoid that by not coming at all. After all, the majority of council had demanded that the manager do the right thing. That is true. We demanded that the manager do the right thing and make his decision. His decision. Not exactly what was expressed in the letter Mr. John shared with his media friends. And that was a correspondence from Mr. Silka to Mr. Dice. I had hoped earlier in January that Mr. Silka would have chosen the path based on what he had been presented individually by 4 members of council. The evidence was in front of him. He did not wish to act or say when he would act. This was very, very frustrating, and it places you in the position of having knowledge of wrongdoing. So what do you do with that wrongdoing? Because you wouldn't ordinarily think that, as somebody said, somebody makes a mistake. Good men make a mistake. Good women make a mistake. Good people make mistakes. So, the evidence was in front of him. He did not wish to act, and I am prohibited. I'm not going to get an explanation over why he didn't choose to act. I'm prohibited from discussing why I had to tell Mr. Silka that he must act in accordance with what he himself agreed was a danger and was wrong. This is some great transparency that I've heard here. perception is reality that I hear here tonight, isn't it? Unilateral action, which is when council gets to do things like that, you have to ask yourself the question, when is it right and when is it wrong? It's got to stop. It's got to stop because we're toxic. And please don't act like this has not been going on for years. Back then, when they didn't like him or they didn't like her, he was out or she was out. Does it make any difference when it would be 7 members of council that would agree about that unilateral action? Nobody noticed it then. When does it stop? How does it stop? We have to talk about this as soon as we stop hating. Maybe this is the way to do it. And it's a hell of a way, but I'd like to get there. I have some ideas on how to us to get there. I heard somebody mention something about that. It had to do with the way that it wouldn't be a manager's job description. I think it would actually be an amendment to the home rule charter. To try to target how are we going to assure that we have good fidelity in everybody's vote. Is it a 5-person vote? That's a very good question. But we've got to reach that. We've also got to reach a lot of other goals that we promised people this last month to do. That's what I'm trying to do. Because right from the start of these 7 people that you see up here, the 3 never trusted the 4, when all of us should have known how important it was to have, from the start, management follow through, especially over essential services like public safety. We had better all work to fix the way that we acquire a manager who can make decisions while talking to all of council. If you think this is the first council to use this unilateral action against a manager, you need to do some homework on the action of past councils. Go down the list of ordinance. Pretend you're a detective. Start from the earliest year back and you can read, just like a novel, what happened underneath different councils. Transparency is when you don't cover up for wrongdoing. But that is exactly what was there. And I've been supportive of our chief, and I've been supportive of the chief before him, and they both knew it. What is particularly offensive to me is that any of their misdeeds are dealt with. You have a way to do it. And then you also have a way to go to the media and create an entire media blitz, courtesy of Mr. Johns, aided by Mr. Erosenko, who you can always count on to find some way to attack certain women on this council. Greg Erosenko is no stranger to reaching out when opportunity knocks. To anyone who doubts his taking the opportunity to destroy particular members of council, I suggest you check the records. Check out the DVDs from the public library during most of 2002, my first year on council. I happened to be the target of the misogyny and the belittling. Okay? Be sure not to miss the one in May and September of 2009. All right? Which, coincided with the primary and the general election. Yes, that happened to be an election year. Wait, this is an election year. In the 4 years of my enduring verbal attacks, sometimes for my efforts, certainly this time for Mrs. Allison's, there's a common theme. It's a repulsive double standard on who has a conflict of interest. Mayor, if you would like to know what a conflict of interest for personal gain from wrongdoing looks like in Monroeville, you don't need to be interviewed by Mr. John's media friends. You need a mirror. That's what you need. In 2009, when our then manager, Marshall Bond, asked each department head to provide a hiring date order of employees when we were considering a reduction in force, Mr. Erosenko sure had the conflict with the order in which the Recreations and Parks Department fell. By his orchestrating executive session straw votes, which are not allowed, and were taken over my strong protest, this resulted in the firing of John Balicki, who was the director of that department. So, you see, if Mr. Erosenko takes the same level of interest in you as you do in him, he'll do everything he can to change your outcome for his mutual benefit. Even though, and we tell him this quite a lot, he has no executive power. Monroeville's form of municipal government, as I have reminded him, is a strong manager-council government, not a strong mayor-council government, such as Pittsburgh has. This night is terrible. What makes it worse is the effort to pressure people up here, 4 people, who are trying to do the right thing. I will not be pressured that way, and I don't think Mrs. Allison will, and if I must wait for the details of a federal investigation to come from this, I will. To the constituents of the 3rd Ward, you have a right to feel any way about that decision. I'm doing what I'm legally supposed to do, and personally, I would want you to know the truth. But by the efforts of Mr. Erosenko primarily, the truth has been stained with deception. Perception is reality. I've heard it here many times tonight. It's been stained. And the real transparency, the real thing to do was the discovery that we all would have been able to do in that executive session. We would have all known. We wouldn't have said, well, I know that I just don't want anything to do with it because your mind is made up. You didn't know what it was. You had the opportunity to know what it was. And if you need to, Mr. Mayor, perhaps we can arrange for some sensitivity training. And meanwhile, a lack of transparency is at the very root of what caused all this mess. If you need a few women to show you the way, a few gentlemen to show you the way, it doesn't matter. Somebody needs to do that, and I'm through.
Nick.